Part 5. Inevitability of War. Chapter 15. Tipping Point. In earlier pages, we've considered the fulfillment of many prophetic events up to this point in history. However, the prophecies that follow are a little different, as they relate to specific nation-states rather than society, events, or organizations. The coming prophecies that we'll examine are known as the Conspiring Nations, the Damascus Prophecy, and the Gog and Magog War. The first of these prophecies was partially fulfilled in 1967 and is so close to completion that it may already have happened as you read these pages. The remaining two prophecies haven't come to pass yet. However, if current geopolitical events continue at the pace they have in recent years, then we'll arrive at that point very soon. With this in mind, I intend to examine current world events as they stand pre-June 2023. We'll then overlay these events with prophecy and see if the geopolitics align or not. You will discover they do. I also hope to demonstrate that all three prophecies are interlinked. Indeed, the end of the first prophecy is so closely connected to the second and third that they flow into each other as if one homogeneous whole, unfolding in rapid succession rather than being punctuated by decades. In essence, they're a tipping point between the old world order we've all known to the new evil era ruled by the Antichrist. Let's turn our attention to the first of these prophecies and examine it in greater detail. 1. The Conspiring Nations. The prophecy of the Conspiring Nations is extremely old and can be found in the Book of Psalms. The first line tells us it was written by a man called Asaph, who was one of 3 Levites commissioned by King David to be in charge of the singing in the house of God. As such, we can date the prophecy to somewhere around 1010 to 970 BC. It reads as follows: God, do not keep silent. Do not hold your peace, O God. Do not be still. For look, your enemies make an uproar, those who hate you lift up their head. They make a shrewd plot against your people, conspiring against your treasured ones. Come, they say, let's wipe them out as a nation. Let Israel's name be remembered no more. For with one mind they plot together, against you do they make a covenant. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagrites, Gebal, Ammon, and Amalek. Philistia with the inhabitants of Tyre, even Assyria has joined them, becoming a strong arm for Lot's sons. Do to them as you did to Midian, to Sisera and Jabin at the Kishon River, who perished at Endor, they became as dung for the ground. Make their nobles like Oreb and Zeb, all their princes like Zebah and Zalmunna, who said, let us take possession of the pasture lands of God. My God, make them like tumbleweed, like chaff before the wind. As a fire burns a forest, and as a flame sets mountains ablaze, so pursue them with your tempest, and terrify them with your storm. Cover their faces with shame, so they may seek your name Adonai. Let them be ashamed and dismayed forever. Let them be humiliated and perish. Let them know that you alone, whose name is Adonai, are El Elyon over all the earth. The prophecy I bring before you is no ordinary one. It has stood the test of time for over 3 millennia. Consequently, if you search for these nations in the confines of a contemporary geography book, you won't find them. But their locations are a matter of historical record. Let's consider where they are today. Gebal and Tyre, though obscure to the modern world, once thrived in what we know as Lebanon, as evidenced by the countless artifacts unearthed by the toils of archaeologists. Assyria, now modern-day Syria, also encompassed parts of northern Iraq. The Hagrites are said to have dwelled in Egypt. Ammon, Moab, and Edom, on the other hand, all exist within the borders of Jordan, a country that has seen much turmoil throughout the ages. Let us not forget the Amalekites, who hailed from the far reaches of eastern Egypt and the Arabian Sinai Desert. The Philistines, now known as Palestinians, occupied the Gaza Strip long before the formation of the modern state of Israel in 1948. And finally, the Ishmaelites, a fierce people who called the deserts of Saudi Arabia their home. All of these nations, though scattered by time and distance, are Arabs by descent and the direct ancestors of the nations mentioned in the prophecy. The Bible tells us many things about these nations, and one thing in particular: at no point in history have they jointly conspired against Israel. We can therefore conclude that the author of this psalm was not describing events unfolding in his own time. The scripture is prophetic, written for future generations. The shrewd plot. Hear me when I say that the Arab nations have never been fond of God's plan to bestow the promised land upon Israel, a people chosen by him for his divine purposes. When Joshua led the Israelites across the Jordan River on the 10th of Nisan, early April, some 1,407 years before the birth of Christ, the nations could not fathom the magnitude of what had occurred. Fast forward to today, and the Arab nations of the world would have us believe that Israel took the land by sheer force. But the Bible paints a different picture. For the land belonged to God in the first instance. As such, he has the right to give it to whomever he chooses. And so it was that he chose the promised line of Abraham, the descendants of Isaac and Jacob, to inherit this sacred soil. The Bible, with its unerring truth, clearly outlines the battles for possession of this land that ensued over the centuries. It details the exiles and returns, to the ultimate decimation of the nation by the mighty Roman Empire in 70 AD. The divine hand of God has always been at work, guiding and directing his chosen people. And that guiding hand brought Israel back to the land in 1948, much to the dismay of the Arab nations. From the very outset, Israel came under attack by guerrilla forces based in Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan. And the fledgling nation, with almost no defenses whatsoever, fought back. The turning point came 18 years later in November of 1966, when Israeli forces lashed out attacking the Jordanian West Bank village of Al-Samu. The attack left 18 dead and 54 wounded. Tensions escalated. Then in April of 1967, the Israeli Air Force successfully shot down 6 Syrian MiG fighter jets who crossed their border. Little did they know the situation would soon escalate even further, leading to one of the most significant moments in the history of the Middle East. Finally, on the 22nd of May 1967, Egypt took a hostile step by blockading Israeli shipping in the Gulf of Aqaba, effectively sealing off the southern port city of Eilat. As if this wasn't enough, King Hussein of Jordan further escalated tensions by signing a mutual defense pact with Egypt. An act which placed Jordanian forces under Egyptian command upon his arrival in Cairo on the 30th of May. Adding more fuel to the fire, Iraq joined the Arab alliance shortly after. With Israel's neighbors mobilizing for war, Israel launched a swift preemptive airstrike on the morning of 5 June, devastating more than 90% of the Egyptian Air Force while it was still grounded. The Syrian Air Force suffered a similar fate. This marked the beginning of the infamous Six-Day War. Without air cover, the Egyptian army were exposed and were quickly overrun by Israeli forces. Within 3 days, Israel had secured a decisive victory on the ground, capturing the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Peninsula up to the east bank of the Suez Canal. Lebanon was a minor player in the war, carrying out just one air raid into Israel on the first day of conflict, before openly withdrawing from all further aggression. One can only assume that after seeing how badly their mighty neighbors had fared, they lost all heart for battle. History attests the commanding officer of the Lebanese army, General Emil Bastani, as saying, "Any further attacks on Israel would be suicidal." Lebanon made the right decision for their nation, as they were the only Arab country not to lose territory as a consequence of fighting. Jordan, on the other hand, wasn't as sensible. As the conflict raged on, their forces began shelling West Jerusalem on the 5th of June, in spite of Israel's warning to King Hussein to stay out of the fray. Jordanian aggression was met with a crushing counterattack, leading to Israel driving the Jordanian military out of East Jerusalem, and most of the West Bank by the 8th of June. This resounding success became the defining moment of the Six-Day War. The United Nations Security Council called for a ceasefire that day, which Israel, Egypt and Jordan accepted immediately. Syria remained obstinate, continuing to shell villages in northern Israel, thereby prolonging the conflict. It was only after heavy fighting that Israel launched the decisive assault on the fortified Golan Heights, successfully wresting control from Syrian forces. Syria declared a ceasefire on the 11th of June. The conflict was over. The Six-Day War had devastating consequences for the Arab nations involved. Egypt suffered a staggering 11,000 fatalities, Jordan 6,000, and Syria 1,000, while Israel's losses were a mere 700 men. Adding insult to injury, the Arabs found much of their equipment, armaments and weapons had been captured or destroyed by the Israelis, thereby weakening their remaining forces further. Though the war may have ended, tensions between Israel and its neighbors didn't. Indeed, the bitterness rumbles on, even to this day with no apparent end in sight. Late arrivals. Those with a keen eye will have noticed the absence of Saudi Arabia and Iraq on the battlefield. It wasn't due to lack of intent. The fact of the matter is that Israel caught the Arab nations off guard with a stunning preemptive strike, leaving their adversaries reeling and struggling to regroup. Saudi Arabia and Iraq responded by mobilizing their troops, sending ground forces and tanks in support of the Jordanian offensive. However, both nations arrived too late to join the battle. Had the war dragged on, we can be certain that Saudi Arabia and Iraq would have been on the front line. A partial fulfillment. It is safe to say the prophecy of the conspiring nations was partially fulfilled in 1967. We can certainly tick the following from the list. 1. They will make a shrewd plot against your people, conspiring against your treasured ones. And 2. For with one mind they will plot together. Against you do they make a covenant. And 3. Do to them as you did to Midian, to Sisera and Jabin at the Kishon River, who perished at Endor, they became as dung for the ground. Make their nobles like Oreb and Zeb, all their princes like Zebah and Zalmunna, who said, Let us take possession of the pasture lands of God. Note, this section of prophecy says, Do to them. The them are all peoples and nations that rebelled against God's people and failed, therefore implying that those who attack Israel will fail in like manner. And 4. As a fire burns a forest and as a flame sets mountains ablaze. So pursue them with your tempest and terrify them with your storm. Again, note that the speed of Israel's attack was indeed like a tempest. Wars don't last much less than 6 days. And finally, 5. Cover their faces with shame, let them be ashamed and dismayed forever. Let them be humiliated. Again, note that by any stretch of the imagination, the partial fulfillment of this prophecy is stunning. Pure hatred. In the wake of the Six-Day War, a glimmer of hope arose that the tempestuous Middle East might see some measure of calm. But in 1979, a dark cloud of upheaval descended upon the region once more, with the onset of the Islamic Revolution in Iran. This cataclysmic event toppled the Shah and a monarchy that had endured for over 2 millennia. Iran had been Israel's friend prior to this moment, even supplying the Jewish nation with its primary source of oil. That cooperation would be shattered when the newly formed Islamic State aligned themselves with their Arabic Muslim neighbors. Old friendships were replaced with bitter enmity and mutual disdain. The animosity grew, reaching its nadir on the 3rd of August 2005, when Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad sent shockwaves throughout the world, when he brazenly called for the destruction of what he termed the Zionist regime. Ahmadinejad was careful never to use the word Israel again. Doing so would acknowledge its existence as a legitimate nation-state in his eyes. But his hatred ran far deeper than mere semantics, when he urged surrounding Arab nations to cut all diplomatic and economic ties with the Zionist regime, just as Iran had done. This included discontinuing oil sales. As nasty as this was, what followed was far worse for Israel. Building the bomb. Let's look again at the prophecy of the conspiring nations. When we do so, you'll notice one element hasn't been fulfilled yet. The scripture reads, Come, they say, let's wipe them out as a nation. Let Israel's name be remembered no more. It is interesting to note that the Oxford English Dictionary defines the phrase, wipe them out as, to eliminate something completely. I would suggest that conventional warfare doesn't accomplish this task. Let's consider what does. In 2012, the world began to see the frightening prospect of Iran acquiring a nuclear weapon. Such a weapon would make their threats of destroying Israel a real and present danger. But developing a nuclear weapon is a complex and challenging task. one that requires both a warhead and an independent delivery system. Regardless, U.S. intelligence agencies including the CIA, reported that Iran was actively working towards developing such a weapon, by enriching uranium to create a nuclear bomb. By 2017, Iran was halfway there when they unveiled the Ch15, an operational ballistic missile system. But the missing piece of the jigsaw was the warhead, which required enriched uranium above 90% purity. A process Iranian scientists were already working hard to achieve. We should recall the size of Israel is a mere 290 miles long, and 85 miles wide at its midpoint. The precariousness of its existence cannot be overstated. Just 2 nuclear warheads could spell the annihilation of the entire nation. It is therefore unsurprising to learn that Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, publicly issued a warning to Iran when he addressed the UN General Assembly on the 27th of September 2012. The message was crystal clear: once Iran has enriched uranium to 90% purity, Israel will launch airstrikes against its adversary, thereby signaling a declaration of war. Though couched in diplomatic language, the intent was unmistakable. Iran, for its part, has made its own intentions equally clear. They aim to obliterate Israel at the earliest opportunity. As recently as 2020, the country's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, called for the Muslim world to unify under one banner, to wipe Israel from the face of the earth. However, without a nuclear warhead, the Ayatollah's words are impotent. This reality is changing rapidly though, and the moment when their threat becomes a reality is close. In fact, according to a recent report by the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, written in 2023, enriched uranium in a test sample revealed that Iran had achieved 83.7% purity. If the IAEA's findings are accurate, then Iran is dangerously close to Israel's red line. Everything up to this point is biblical truth outlined in Scripture, and supported by real-world events. What follows hereafter is history in the making. Actual prophecies being acted out by global players as we live and breathe. Prophecies which I suggest will unfold in rapid succession. Come, they say, let's wipe them out as a nation. Iran will try. But our next prophecy is quite clear. They do not succeed.